Good afternoon. Well, drinks. We are just letting a few more people come into the Twitter space, but we expect to be getting live in the next couple of minutes. And here we are in the usual place with some unfamiliar friends, people that we've met, some, shall I say, have picked up. Over this afternoon's discussion, we're going to be talking about the power crisis in this country. How have we got to where we are? What's caused it? And what are some of the possible solutions? But before we get to that, I think you guys need to introduce yourselves to the audience. Starting with you, Taku.
Now we're starting with the least important.
Clearly, as you guys completely forgot me on the guest list twice, if I might add.
I'm in trouble.
Yes, I'm Taku Zomklanga, CEO of GridPro. We're an energy developer / investor. We are developing mostly renewable energy projects across the country for commercial and industrial customers.
Thank you. And you're wearing a jacket.
Yes.
And
Well, everybody, we
you're
just
wearing a jacket like Tinashe. When you grow up, do you want to be like that?
Well, I figured I would try to dabble into his fan base because he keeps forgetting me, like I said on Twitter. So he must share for his penance.
You're not letting him forget this, huh?
yeah, I'll remember now.
I
I like your hairstyle and your beard, by the way.
No, we look alike, isn't it?
You look like me.
Well, it's all good. Well, my name is Victor Otenzi. I'm with African Transmission Corporation. We are an renewable energy developer. We've done very well in this country. We have developed Central Grid PV power plant. It's in Nyabira.
How big is it?
It is currently just about 2.5 megawatts, but we're in construction, taking it to 25 megawatts.
Okay.
We raise money from domestic institutional investors, $30 million. So by July next year, we'll be on 30 megawatts. And we've got a portfolio of projects, hydro, wind even, developing a wind project in the country, commercial and industrial. We're developing also 2 other PV solar power plants, commercial and industrial, on a large scale as well. So, we're a growing company.
Are you the biggest?
No. We never set out to be the biggest. We set out to be the smallest.
But you are the biggest.
Really, we never see ourselves in terms of size. Here's the story about this country. The laws are very clear. Start on 100 kilowatts and you're a grid scale power plant. And what we set out to do was to just build 100 kilowatts and then we take it from there.
Okay. So you raised money to build a solar farm.
Yes.
Can I see your shoes?
The only shoes we bought. I would have loved to bring the pair of shoes that we brought. It's only construction shoes.
You only bought safety shoes?
Only safety shoes.
Are you sure?
Those are the only shoes we bought.
You don't have a sneaker collection?
I would have loved to bring the shoes. I forgot about it.
And did you marry a new wife?
I wish I could. Yeah?
But it's good to have someone on the show looking more dapper than Tinashe.
Yes.
We are
Absolutely.
You're wearing a suit.
Look, my background is investment banking as well.
Okay.
And then I transitioned into development. So, it's also good to, we all look at Tinashe every week.
When you grow up, you want to be Tinashe?
Tinashe.
Shame on you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure being on the show. My name is Josh Chifamba. I've got 40 years experience in this electricity supply industry. I started in 82 at Wange. And after that, I also went and worked in the region in South Africa and in Lesotho for 6 years. Then came back to Zimbabwe. And for 7 years, I was CEO of ZESA. So I've got a good grounding in terms of understanding the challenges that the sector is facing. I was right at the core phase, so I saw most of it happening.
And you can also tell them that your greatest claim to fame is you are my...
Yeah, oh, yeah, sure.
You're my relative.
Okay. Yeah, for what it's worth, yeah, sure.
Unfortunately.
No. So it's not fortunate. That's why he's so smart, I think.
Yeah. 40 years. How old are you? No, it's okay. And also, what a lot of people don't know about you is you're actually a corporate finance expert.
I don't know. So they say probably in my second life I should go into that. But I sort of take to finance like a duck to water. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to bank him when I used to be a banker. And he was one of the few CEOs that we could go toe to toe on finance discussions with.
That is true.
And sometimes I wouldn't admit, but after the meeting, I would have to go back and look at the textbook.
No, you're actually quite right. There's one anecdote that you might enjoy was I said something that was actually wrong. I think I got a figure wrong. And he went into my DMs. He's like, I think you got this wrong. And he was right.
Thank you. I feel so flattered.
What are we drinking today, Rufar?
Well,
You know, that's the only reason you came today, right?
Yes, absolutely. Today I'm delighted to share that we got this fantastic gift of the cigar malt. We had Dalma, I think a season or two ago. It's really good. This is the cigar malt, and it's from our friend who runs Valsa Solar. So it's appropriate that we're drinking a tipple on the account of another energy player and expert. So because it's a cigar malt, it's actually made to be paired with a cigar. So I've got a cigar from, this is another gift as well. It's a box of Mosia Tunya, the locally made cigars. It's from my running partner, Widzo. So I'm going to be polite and not light up during the discussion, but later on I'm going to be pairing the cigar malt with the cigar.
Okay, and we've got something else on the table?
Yeah, I think we've got some Glenmorangie. It's another single malt. It's one of your favorites. I think it looks like the 10-year-old. I didn't have a chance to look at the bottle. It's quite smooth as well. But I've been looking for an excuse all season to light up. So I'm going to stick to the cigar malt, and I think your Sekuru is going to have the Glenmorangie.
Yeah. And it is the silly season, so rather unusually, we're actually opening 2 bottles on the show. Yeah, we're going to have a really good time today. And Obanyenyezi, you look very busy there.
Yeah, I'm making a Malawi Shandi.
Who let you behind the bar?
Well, it turns out that we've got the 3 of them. I'm just making one now.
You want to talk about it a little bit?
Malaysian, yeah.
Does it have anything to do with Malawi? I'm not so sure, but I suspect so. It's a favorite in Malawi. And I always say, when I went to Malawi, they don't include Mazoe, because obviously they don't have Mazoe, but we include Mazoe in our Malawi Shandi. And I think it just gives it an extra oomph. I don't know if
for a non-alcoholic drink, I think the usage of the word oomph is inappropriate.
It's rather liberal.
It's a sugar high. So, in fact, I think the oomph is more likely to come from a sugar high than from alcohol. Don't you agree?
No, you just carry on doing what you're doing over there.
Okay.
We won't take you too seriously. Gurundoro, maybe you can just paint the picture for us. We're sitting in the dark.
Sure.
I did buy sneakers, but I'm not doing a solo fun. We're sitting in the dark, 20 hours a day. Yeah. I hear in some parts they're going over 24 hours at a time with no power. We're told it's got to do with Kariba running out of water. It boggles my mind that all those clever people exist. They just woke up one day and Kariba was empty. Because that's what it seems like, that it was a surprise. Is that really the problem? And how did we get here?
Yeah. Well, essentially, what we are facing now is a problem that has been a long time in the making. Fundamentally, we are having a problem of lack of investment in the electricity sector. The sector is very lean on operating assets. So it's very short there at all levels of the power system. That is at the generation level, we don't have enough power stations in the country to supply electricity. So it's a supply side problem, essentially. And then on the transmission level, we also have a problem there, but it's not as bad compared to the distribution level. The distribution level, I'm sure when you drive around, you've seen poles leaning over, vegetation overgrowth, and all sorts of things happening.
So do you distinguish transmission from distribution?
Okay, transmission are those big lines you see on pylons. And essentially when you are transmitting, you are taking power from power stations, which may be far away, like far out at Kariba or Rwange, and you bring them to the load centers where there's actually consumption. Then you step down the voltage. The transmission voltage in the country is 330 kV volts. So you step it down to what we call sub-transmission, 132 kV. And from there, those are bulk supply points that you're supplying now. Then you step it down and you distribute it in the centers where the demand is, where the customers are.
So you're saying it's that last part that is a problem?
The transmission also has some bottlenecks, but it's not as bad as distribution. Distribution is severely congested, and there's a lot of investment that needs to be done at the distribution level. The equipment is old and antiquated, and it needs to be upgraded. So that's a very serious problem that needs to be done. In fact, one of the key indicators is losses that you get on the system. And you find that the distribution losses that we have on our system are quite high, probably as much as 10, 12%, when they should actually be lower, around 7%. You see? So it's all because of old equipment and some feeders that are old need reinforcing because the load has grown, but the conductors, the infrastructure that feeding them has remained really stagnant. So you need to operate all those systems so that the distribution system also can be able to deliver power efficiently. So there's a lot that needs to be done there at the distribution level.
So Rwange and Kariba are old and not sufficient.
Yes, definitely not.
The
old thermals that you have in Bulawayo, in Harare, those are very old. In Minyati, you can forget about them. They're also very old. We had a plan to actually refurbish them, and I think the plan is still on the cards. I think if there's not been any progress, probably it's to do with funding, but that was the idea, to actually refurbish them. These things were commissioned in the 40s, eh? Yes, they're very, very old.
World War II.
Yeah. They're very, very old. Yes. But the beauty about them, you see, is they're embedded in the distribution network. They are in the cities. So from them, you don't incur transmission losses. But straight from the power station, you feed the customers on the distribution network. But if you take Rwange or Kariba, you first have to transmit the power. There are some losses that you incur there when you transmit the power. About ballpark 2%, 3% losses that you incur as the electricity moves to those points. Yeah.
So Rwange, Kariba are old. The big power lines, you say they're okay.
Yeah.
But not in the best state.
There are some, we still need to reinforce some of the lines. We still need to build new lines altogether, some interconnections, so that you make the system reliable.
Okay.
Yeah. Normally when you're running a transmission system, you run it on a basis of called N-1. In other words, you assume that if one feed goes out, what remains will still be able to feed the power system. Yeah.
Redundancy.
Yes, redundancy, that's right.
So you say, okay, so in a normal system, we produce 100 units of electricity. You put them on the power transmission lines, we should get 98.
Yes, after losses.
Arriving in the city.
After losses, okay.
And you say this is normal.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's normal, yeah.
And then from there...
It's like frictional loss.
Okay.
Yes.
Then from there, we go into the smaller power lines, which are the below
The
1, which
distribution.
are the 33 kV.
33 kV.
Down
Yes,
to what,
yes.
what are the ones that go past my house?
Okay, you've got, probably in front of your house, you've got 11 kV lines.
Okay.
But on the back of your property, along the boundary, that's a low voltage line.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's where you feed off from.
And you say
Yes.
now those ones are in a really terrible state.
Yes, those ones. And the equipment upstream, the equipment in the substations, in the 33 kV substations, the equipment in there where you step down 33 to 11, that needs operating. That needs to be refurbished at the moment. It's very old. Yeah?
If you allow me,
Yes, please.
I mean, just to reinforce the point about the distribution system. Our solar farm in Nyabira we feed in the 33 kV network. In fact, every PV solar power plant right now is feeding in that 33 kV network. We are only able to feed into the grid when the grid is available. So what you see now is that for many hours in a year, sometimes months, we are unable to supply our electricity even though we can generate it.
Did you say months?
It can go into months, yes. We've had like a whole month when we can generate, but we are unable to generate because the distribution system is not reliable. So that is the problem with the distribution system that Josh is talking about. It is really not in a good state.
Yeah.
And you say it needs investment. Okay, so we've had these things running since the 40s. Wange has been around since 82. So, you know, Kariba since
59, 61. 1959, 61. Yeah.
1961. I think it's younger than you.
Oh, yeah. It's 2 years younger than me.
But the rest of us in our everyday lives, we haven't been running cars since 1982. We haven't, even houses. Nobody lives in a house that's been the same since the 1940s and has had no major rewiring and coat of paint. How do we end up in this situation?
Yeah, okay. And let me just say on Kariba. Kariba initially, when it was commissioned, on the Zimbabwe side, we had 6 units, which were 111 megawatts each. That's totaling up to 666 megawatts. And in the 80s, we did some work there to operate the units from 111 megawatts to 125. So there was some work that was done. Yeah. Now the bit about Kariba also is because it's hydro, there's not much maintenance that you need to do because your primary energy is coming from the water, as opposed to say Wange, where your primary energy, there's too much logistics there, coal, all sorts of things, you know, that you have to burn, cooling water facilities, and all those things, you know. So that's the difference. So there was some work that was done to operate Kariba. And then obviously now, Kariba, where we did an extension, we added 2 additional units, that's 150 megawatts each, to get it to 300 megawatts. So now the total from Kariba now is about 1,050 megawatts that is coming out of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we did some work on Kariba.
Yeah, there's some work that was done on Kariba, yes.
But we didn't do anything on the power lines?
No, the power lines on Kariba, no, there was nothing done on the power lines except the normal maintenance that is done about them. So that system, I think, is still okay in terms of its carrying capacity. Yeah.
But the
From
33 kV
Kariba.
system is a problem.
It's the distribution system when you get to the different towns,
So
or different locations.
why has that not been maintained?
No.
Why has no
Okay,
money
fine.
been put in it?
Yeah, no, that's fine. So now we come to the first problem, why there's been lack of investment. So the first problem is that over the years, ZESA has been charging tariffs that were sub-economic. In other words, with their tariffs, they were not generating sufficient revenue to cover all their costs. Operating costs, depreciation, and even return on capital. Yeah? That's the first problem. So the first problem that has caused this in Zimbabwe is sector viability. The sector has not been viable over a long period of time. The second problem is to do with macroeconomic stability. In other words, what has actually been happening, in particular, to do with inflation and exchange rate. If you look at in the years, like in the 90s, late 90s when ZESA was profitable, yeah? If you look at the numbers, would make an operating surplus. But the moment you applied finance charges, the situation flipped because of exchange rate losses.
So sorry, just to take you back a little bit, you mentioned that we had sub-economic tariffs.
Yes.
We were not collecting enough to pay for the electricity, to cover the cost of electricity. In your opinion, was that a policy choice, or there were other constraints that really forced us into that situation? So,
I think it was more a policy choice. Remember, this is also the time you were talking more of price control for private sector, but also there was price control in the sector, you see. So from a political perspective, obviously they were trying to protect consumers, you know, from the correct tariffs.
by keeping us in the dark.
Yes, but then it's counterproductive.
Okay, I mean, you were starting to go I guess he preempted your explanation. You were starting to explain that maybe actual income minus expenses, even at ZESA's best time, the answer was positive.
Yeah.
But once you included other costs that came
Like
after
finance
the
charges.
finance
Yes,
charges,
yes, yes, yes.
depreciation, amortization.
Yeah, even
This was
if
lost
we made a whole operating surplus, including depreciation, the moment you applied finance charges as the last item, that's it.
You became loss making.
You became loss making.
So, but I mean, you were running this institution. You were running this institution, and perhaps you talk about the 90s. Maybe the difference was subtle because it was right at the bottom of the income statement. In the last decade, I lived in Mozambique for a year, and we were importing power from Mozambique. And my ZESA bill in Zimbabwe, with my whole household, and I have a very expensive household, was lower than my
Exactly.
EDM bill in Maputo when I was living by myself in a two-bed apartment.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Avenue, I remember the name of the avenue that I lived on. Yes, in Baisha. But I was paying more for my bill there, and yet our power was coming from there.
Correct.
That means for accountants, which I'm not, Tinashe, ZESA was making a gross loss.
Correct.
They were
Exactly.
selling at less than the price they were paying the supplier.
Exactly. Exactly.
But-
you will
but-
actually
but-
find that in Namibia, the tariffs also in Namibia are so good, and the utility there is performing very well because of that. You know, in fact, they've got almost an A rating, credit rating.
But
because of that.
you're a smart gentleman. I just gave you props for knowing corporate finance. How were you making a gross loss?
Well, you know what? Okay, fine. You see, the tariffs then, where we would propose a tariff, because every year we would submit budgets anyway to the parent ministry. But you would not get the tariff approved by government. It's as simple as that.
So where did the difference come from?
No, there was no difference. There was no subsidy. This is what people don't know. ZESA was never received any subsidy at all from government. over
George,
this.
maybe I can come in. What happens is your tariff might be commercially viable today, but with inflation, and especially hyperinflation, within 3 months, it's redundant. You have to go back. Now, if they're not approving and it's yearly, imagine you have the same tariff for 2 years, running 2 years, with high inflation. It's just not viable.
No, guys, I'm a simpleton.
Yeah.
Mozambique wants 9 cents. I think 9 point something cents,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
At the time, my bill here was effectively 4 cents. And some people were not even paying the 4 cents. So come month end, you collect 4 cents from some people and 0 from others. And Mozambique wants 9 before you've paid your salaries, before you've bought tea and coffee in the office. Where was the 5 cents coming from?
Yeah.
Well, it's Josh will explain, but it's very clear if you look at the financial statements that all that money is now sitting in accumulated debts on ZESA's balance sheet, which are running in billions. Yeah. So all that 5 cents was just being parked there and not paying the lenders. And so we're sitting right now, how much is it now of your accumulated debts in ZESA?
Well,
You know, they're not his.
I don't know now. I don't know now, but
Our debts.
when I left, we had about something like almost 400 days receivable in terms
Josh,
of debtors.
No, we're talking about the old historical debts.
You mean the loans?
Yes.
That's about $500 million.
$500 million.
Yeah.
So that's where the 5 cents was going.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, I could pay my operating costs, right? I could cover them. But when it comes to finance charges, we're just parking them there and then they're just accumulating. So we owe actually more than $600 million of historical debts that are just sitting on the ZESA
But those were
balance
in
sheet.
Zim dollars and inflation.
No,
They are in US dollars.
They are in US dollars.
These
This
are-
is
this is
money.
money.
So
from
you're
the World
saying
Bank.
ZESA right now owes Mozambique and everybody?
Not Mozambique.
No.
We're talking about the financiers that
Finance,
finance
World Bank,
even the expansion that
European
he's talking
banks.
about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
World
Okay.
Bank, European banks, and so forth.
But presumably, you all, not you, sorry, we are personalizing it, sorry, and you don't even work there anymore.
Yeah.
ZESA, presumably, ZESA still owes Mozambique. ZESA still owes ESCOM.
Yeah, they do. They
The
do.
current
Probably they do.
obligations, yes.
I think in the newspapers they've been talking about
Correct.
outstanding payments to ESCOM and to other suppliers.
So perhaps that explains some of the power cuts that we have now, because we are in arrears with our foreign suppliers of electricity. So they want to see cash before they.
Obviously, I think, in fact, ZES has been talking about that the only way they can actually get additional power is if they pay for it. I remember when I was CEO myself, when I joined in 2011, we were owing about 100 million to Kabora Basa at that time. And eventually we paid it off. But it was quite a struggle. It was a mission.
How
to
did
pay
you
it.
manage to do that?
Well, eventually we got money from Forex allocated from RBZ. And that time, at least, we're in a dollarized environment, you know, and the tariff was good. On average, we're doing about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. It was still below cost reflective, but just below cost reflective. But at least we could generate sufficient funds. The other challenge, of course, that ZESA always has is collection, especially with local authorities, the city councils. I think at the time I was there, when I came in, the debt was about 280 million. And the annual turnover was probably about 750 million. So you can see how much just one institution, the local authorities, were owing.
And you said the total debt was 400 days. So that means if ZESA was making 200,
The 400 days was the days receivable.
so if ZESA was making 750 million a year, they were owed close to $1 billion by consumers.
Yeah, yeah.
But you said an interesting thing. You said we had forex allocated by the Reserve Bank.
In a dollarized environment.
No. That was later. But before, when we were in 2011, we would simply take from our revenue and pay what we could do. Yes.
Then
Yeah. So we
it's a
needed
dollar
time to pay. So we paid it over about 7 months. 10.
So in your opinion, because today we are selling electricity at a sub-economic tariff, and and we've been doing this actually for the longest time, and we have this number that we associate with actual demand for electricity in our country. But one of the things that's obvious to me is that if we were charging an economic tariff, that actual demand would be much, much smaller than it is, because the laws of supply and demand mean that if we're going to be selling electricity at, say, 10, 11 cents a kilowatt hour instead of the 4 cents that we're doing now, people will make, the consumer is going to be more mindful about
Of course.
their
True.
their usage.
Very true.
So where would you actually put our aggregate electricity demand if we were selling at the correct tariff?
Okay, fine. You raise a very important point. In fact, one of the problems of having sub-economic tariffs is then you encourage inefficient use of electricity or whatever you're selling. The people don't conserve it. So you need a strong tariff, a good tariff that sends the correct signals to people to save. You will find that during the time when we were in the USD environment and the tariff was coming high, even people were buying now these fluorescent lights, the CFLs and the LEDs, which was good, but they were responding to the tariff signal then. So I don't know what the demand is, but during my time we were sitting at about 2,200 megawatts. Now you've got all these customers that are coming in, and the big boys like Manize that will be coming in. I would imagine in no time the demand could be, if you look at pent-up demand alone, you almost got about 700 megawatts from what the ZESA is saying, all these outstanding connections. And I would imagine it can go as far as 2,700, 2,500 megawatts.
ZESA right now, they've got inquiries of up to 2,300 megawatts additional. Josh is talking about the Manize, that iron and steel plant.
That's Dinson.
Okay. They need 100 megawatts by end of next year. By 2025, they are looking to get to 500 megawatts on their own, and many other customers.
Yeah.
So,
But
one thing about electricity demand, there's a term, Tinashe would know it in economics. It sticks. It does not respond to sort of price signals, that way. Once you've got your connections, you can increase it to 12 cents. You are not going to switch off your fridge or your TV. You can increase it to 14 cents. You are not going to, it's not like a car where you can sort of decide, I'll park my car, maybe I'll not consume. So it's also very sticky demand as well. This is why it's utility business, and this is why it's also regulated as well.
So, Victor, effectively you're saying they can actually charge
20 cents and we'll keep on paying.
And we will pay.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
I'll give you. Sorry, please.
Yeah, it depends. It depends, because some of it is elastic. Some of the demand is elastic. Like if you look at industrial demand, I'll give you a good example. Because of our sub-economic tariffs, there's what we call power factor, which shows how much consumption you are taking of useful power, vis-a-vis what we call useful power. Like if you got beer, the froth and the actual beer itself, So when you supply that,
I love that analogy.
You like the analogy? I knew you'd ring a bell. Yeah. So you find that it's cheaper for a customer to supply the froth on their own than to get it from ZESA. But you have to put that in the tariff. We've got what we call a maximum demand tariff. You know what I mean? Which then sends that signal to the customer to say, improve your power factor, and they improve their power factor. The one Victor is talking about is like cooking load. Cooking load or domestic load is highly inelastic. You see, you may increase the tariffs, but you don't suck the load. Even to displace it. Because at times, there are this time of use tariff where you can actually say, fine, change to do this during the off-peak times, for instance, if you can do it. You find that domestic, you can't tell people to have dinner at 10 o'clock. They will still cook. Yes.
I actually want to go even further, right? Like, so I think elastic or inelastic, I think there is, you guys have touched on that. I think the market can absorb it, definitely, if we increase the tariffs. And the most basic example is, since we're, lo and behold, talking about energy, is talking about fuel prices. For the longest time, we tried to subsidize these, right? Like in dollar, and use the Zimbabwean dollar to pay, it's sub-economic tariffs, whatever. And the government would foot the bill in terms of like US dollar to ZWL conversions. But the moment you went to US dollar terms, everybody still drives. And I think the change in fuel consumption is marginal compared to what it was before, right? In fact, it's only, if it was, before it was probably constrained because there was not enough fuel in the market. Now, the cost of electricity in terms of using energy, right, compared to fuel, is from Kariba or from Wange or from solar, whatever the case may be, is 20% the cost of using energy from fuels, right? But we don't think about it that way, at least not from a policy perspective. To say that we're willing to import $1.something billion a year of fuel, which is energy, but we are saying that, and we're willing to do that at market price. But when it comes to electricity, we must protect people. And these people are willing to pay for paraffin. They're willing to pay for diesel and for gas, right? And these are already bought at global market prices.
Plus taxes.
Yeah, plus taxes. So taxes are extortionate. Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I really did not mean to. They're a little bit higher than...
Is that a Freudian slip?
No, they're a little bit higher than the region. That's what I meant to say. Right? So, the market will take it. Right. I think we're trying to protect people who don't need protection. And I think at the end of the day, right, it ends up being more expensive.
Could you speak to the farmers? Because I think they're a big constituent and they might not be as, their demand may not be as elastic as we are assuming.
Yes. So,
and they hold, that constituent holds a lot of political power.
It does. I genuinely believe that I think what people just want is electricity to start, right? And I think you can still, if everybody had electricity, they could make grown-up decisions about whether farming this crop makes sense for me or not, right? To your point about like liberal economics and everything, that's one. Two, I think you can still kind of find a way to subsidize some of these policies in a way that works, usually using the usual spiel that we use, peak, off-peak, and standard that everybody knows. In which case, everybody who pays for electricity, yes. Because it's on your bill, right?
The prepaid guys understand this.
Which is...
Yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that it's inelastic, because I remember during the GNU when we were dollarized and people were wrapping around their brains the idea of paying for electricity at a real tariff. Right, a lot of people in my demographic certainly made the decision that it made more sense to switch from an electricity geyser to a solar geyser. A lot of people chose to swap out the electric stoves for gas stoves, and they made savings, real savings, in terms of their power their energy consumption per month. So if people are forced to deal with a economic tariff, their behavior will change.
Sure.
But Trufaro, it stretches. So if you look at the people who are actually consuming electricity, that is true. So the demand is inelastic or relatively, you can switch as far as the consumer is concerned. But as far as the farmer is concerned, and I think that's where you were going, that there's a point at which it's no longer economically viable for the farmer. So the farmer must then switch their crop. Now, in Zimbabwe, farmers are not known to easily switch because of government support. And I think that's where the problem is. And what happened during the GNU is while the consumers switched, do you know what happened with the farmers? They simply didn't pay. So some of the debt that was then accumulated post GNU was the farmers who had not paid.
Well, I'd like to just come in here, and because I think we actually have someone who knows what they're talking about. And Seguru, in a meeting, not with me, but with a fellow banker, when you were raising money for prepaid meters, you are famously reported to have said, if I give them prepaid meters, I won't need to load shed them. They'll load shed themselves. But I seem to hear you singing a different tune now.
No.
Did that hypothesis prove to be correct? When people now had real-time feedback on what they were using and the tariff was real, did consumption come down?
Yeah, there was a reduction in consumption. Let me say this. If you've got cost-reflective tariffs and they're on prepaid, they know exactly what they have. They can see the amount of electricity they have, and they can see it decreasing. You see what I mean? So they will get to know which are the culprit appliances in the house that cause that reduction. And they will manage it. As opposed to when they are not on prepaid meters, they just see a bill, but they don't actually know how this bill happens.
And so your argument is, if we give industrial and perhaps agricultural customers, if we put them on prepaid and we give them better data of their consumption, we'll see the load being better managed.
In some countries where they've got smart metering, you'll be wherever you are all over the world, and you can see on your computer exactly how your company is doing because you are talking to the meter. It's very interactive.
The pushback is with the farmers. Can we speak to the farmers specifically?
No, with the farmers, then you've got a challenge because that's a more stubborn load. If they have to water so many, to say water the orchards, and it requires so many liters of water, they have to give those many liters of water, and that's it.
But gents,
you see, and switching there is very difficult.
We are generating 400 to 500 megawatts right now against a current demand that is almost going to about 3,000 megawatts. We've got very little that is going around. Okay, there's an issue there. So we can try, all these, methods, Josh, of, this and that. But what are you going to do with 400 megawatts?
Nothing.
There's nothing you're going to do.
Could we not import? Because we're saying if you're charging 20 cents, then we just import.
Right,
the difference.
right, Nashi. We can import, isn't it? I mean, we've tried to import. We seem not to be able to afford the imports right now. Because there was excess capacity in Mozambique. We failed to buy that electricity. It was snapped. It was snapped by ESCOM. Excess capacity sitting in Zambia. We were not able to take that capacity even though it was offered to us. And of course, it's no longer available. Zambia itself, they are also going to power cuts.
No, but Victor, you say, I'm not sure who we is in your analysis.
No, I'm talking about we as a country.
Because anybody who's running a 3 kVA generator, which is not a very big generator, for 6 or 7 hours a day, their energy bill has already come to, I'd say, $7-8 a day, which is well above what they pay if we were paying Mozambique the 9 cents they lost for.
Right.
Those of us who've had to install or upgrade solar systems in a hurry over the last several weeks have paid 2 or 3 years worth of ZESA bills. And we paid this in hard currency. We've paid out of our pockets. I mean, I don't know many people that have gone and got a loan. I don't know where you could have got a loan to do this. People have paid this out of their pockets.
Yeah.
So who can't afford?
Yeah.
The farmers.
Okay, put the farmers on. Okay, let's say the farmers were even getting it for free.
We've got also that farming load, which is almost close to 300 megawatts, isn't it? We've got also this ferrochrome, huge intensive consumers. The ferrochrome loads. I mean, I know of a plant there which is 100 megawatts, another 100 megawatts, another 100 megawatts, and they're getting that power. I think it was at about 7 cents per
No, but they're exporting. They have US dollars. Why are they being subsidized?
Because they've got to be competitive, isn't it? As far as whoever gives them the tariff is
Who
concerned.
says they must be competitive?
Because
So let me pose this question because I think that's where we're coming to, which is the regulatory framework. Because in a normal market, if there's a shortage, and there's a huge shortage in our country at the moment, if it was viable and plausible, what you'd see happening is entrepreneurs raise money, build plants, and say, look, guys, good luck with ZESA. We've got power that we can sell you at 13, 14 cents a kilowatt hour, guaranteed. Come talk to us. Why haven't we seen that happen?
Well, I must say lately, like as of yesterday, the tariffs were increased again. The regulator is now doing the right thing. They are now increasing the prices, you know what I mean? So, which is very good. In fact, it's on the back of that ZESA today is saying we'll now be able to import power. We're going to get 500 megawatts from here, 500. But the regulator now is increasing price of power.
But is that sustainable in the context of inflation?
To do that.
They're US dollar tariffs.
To me, you know, it's like the president was suggesting, you know, something like let's put all houses on solar, you know, which means he appreciates the gravity of this situation. So to me, what you need is really some shock therapy if we have to do this, you know. To me, I would have said, you know, you really want to dollarize the market like you did for fuel and make electricity be traded in dollars. That way, then you don't have the currency risk that there is now, especially for someone, investors like him. If you got a tariff today, say in Zim dollar, you know, that tariff is not useful at all. You know, it might actually be bankable today, but in no time, because it's Zim dollar, because of exchange rate, it will not be very soon.
But let me give you our tariff situation. Maybe we are given a tariff in US dollars, so it's denominated in US dollars, but the payment is in Zim dollars on the date of payment. At the rate, the official rate that is ruling on the day of payment.
The auction rate.
The auction rate. So that's important. But also what's important is that those tariffs, when we are selling to ZESA, are determined by ZERA, which is our energy regulator. Because of the nature of the market, it's a regulated market. I can assure you that from a regulatory perspective, setting the tariff at the correct level, ZERA does a good job.
Yeah.
That's not the problem. So right now, the current indications for PV solar, if you're building a new power plant, it's around 9 cents per kilowatt hour in US dollars. Look at South Africa, for example, where also PV solar power plants are being built. Developers are competing. The tariffs are between 2 and 3 cents per kilowatt hour. The lowest tariffs for solar globally now are now coming to about 1 cent, 1.3 cents, 1.5 cents. So anybody sitting outside the country looking at a tariff of 9 cents per kilowatt hour would say this is amazing.
Yeah, this is the market too good.
So the problem is not the setting of the tariff. The problem is not the fact that it's denominated in US dollars. It's the fact that we've got to be paid in Zim dollars, and we then have got to translate that money if we are talking to foreign investors. That's where it breaks down.
Yes.
But from a domestic perspective, because we have tested this, we knew, obviously with that structure, you are unable to raise money from foreign investors. We said, okay, fine, it won't work with foreign investors. Let's focus on domestic investors. We did that. We raised money domestically.
Yeah.
And we're expanding.
Yeah.
Of course, we face problems of, they disburse some of that money to us in Zim dollars.
Yeah.
Then we still have got to go to the auction.
Yeah.
It's large sums of money.
Yeah.
You get 150,000, 200,000 per week or so, which comes perhaps maybe a bit later again. But the point is that there are also challenges around maybe converting your Zim dollar receivables as capital costs, because you still need to go and buy most of your equipment outside the country. 80 to 90% of what you are putting in a solar power plant
Victor,
is in dollars.
let's say if you're an investor.
Let's keep talking. Taku's actually, I know you've built a plant and you're building some more. Taku's trying to raise money for the plant right
So
now.
we have.
What's your experience?
All right. So we have been raising debt to augment our equity for the last. I think actively this is December now. So I think we're now actually counting our 12th anniversary in months, and finally.
You've been trying to raise money for a year.
Yeah. So finally, which is unusual, right?
Which is nothing.
Which is yes and no. Yeah, well, yeah, agreed. It's nothing, but it's still. I'll explain why I think that it's not supposed to have been that hard. Because finally, we're coming to the tail end of our first round, of our first round of our first tranche of financing. And so the tariff you just mentioned is one that's specifically for ZESA.
Selling to ZESA.
Selling to ZESA directly, right? Like, so I've got a pretty big offtake in the mining sector, and my power purchase agreement is in United States dollars, right? And my tariff is fairly competitive to what you just mentioned, so from the face value of it, because it's a US dollar tariff, paid in US dollars, as long as the law allows it to. And it makes a lot of economic sense, right? Like, so suddenly, I'm just adding on to what you just said about all the issues that we face. Suddenly, like, it's very, very exciting, and everybody says, yeah, let's do this. However, the challenge that we have faced with, because we've raised most of our funds offshore from foreign investors, the challenge that we have faced is that you're not just explaining to people that this money is to be converted to United States. In that case, you don't have to explain that it's converted to Zimbabwean dollars first. You're saying to them that we'll pay you in United States dollars. We will manage the offshore repatriation if needed and whatever else you want us to do. But we're promising you that we can do this for the next 15 to 20 years in Zimbabwe. And I think. I think after having done it 360, because at times you get you know it's frustrating as a developer, right? And it's not as if anyone is trying to deliberately make things difficult. But at the end of the day, the issue that we have is our institutions and our regulations fluctuate so much that they present a level of risk in and of itself that even ensuring the money at just on the financing costs that you're talking about earlier, it's really, really high because the risk that's put on our transactions is insane.
Could you speak to what's a minimum payback period we should expect from somebody investing in solar or any?
So typically, I think a reasonable payback period would be anywhere from the magnitude of 6 to 9 years, right? If you're talking about, in a healthy environment, and even in the 1 to 2 cents that he's talking about, or 3 cents, some people find it will stretch to 12, 13 years, but it still makes sense because people are willing. The difference between those tariffs and ours is people are willing to look at these institutions, these countries and their institutions, and say, I'm comfortable making a bet over 12, 13 years. I'm going to make a 2 or 3% return, just beat inflation maybe, over 20 years even to get my money back. But I'm okay with it because it's safe, it's stable, this, that, the other. Here, if you've ever read...
the safe and stable part is becomes...
John McMurray's book, I believe, Structured Trade and Corporate... Structured Finance and... commodity trade, I think, or something like that. He talks about how, in maturing economies, the issue is that the institutions are such that it's really, really hard to trust that things are going to work out for a long term. So you get trade finance, and that's where we are as Zim, right? So most of our foreign funds, beyond what he's saying, we get the funds we get in this country are for trade. It's very short-term money. We celebrate.
Can you? Is that a feasible and viable option? Trade financing in
infrastructure finance?
No, not at all.
It's not.
It's not.
It's
So
got
that
to be
is the
long-term
key
financing.
issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, in corporate finance, all the issues you're raising have been solved. If you're in Mozambique, your lenders can insure their debt. They can hedge the currency. They can buy forward contracts, 5-6 years, against Mozambican Metcash, which locks in the exchange rate for everyone for the next, for whatever period has been agreed. These things are underwritten by big global banks.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You go to Credit Suisse, you go to...
George, the Zim currency, the currency in use changes 5 times in 10 years.
Yeah. This is the point, that while these issues have been solved in the rest of the world, they remain open issues in our little teapot country.
Exactly, yes.
Because we don't play by the same rules
Yes.
that the rest of the world plays.
We don't like bookish economics.
So that's the second problem. The first is sub-economic tariffs, and this is the second problem that we have in this country, which has caused underinvestment in the sector.
So what could we do? Because, they came up, I think it was Mtuli who came up with an SI for thermal, I think. that we're producing in Wange, it's SI 138, I think.
Okay, some numbers.
You know those numbers, yeah?
We easily forget where ZESA can charge tariffs in US dollars, and it's an SI. But
yes.
unless we get another SI to say that the currency in use has also changed. But could that be a solution? What could be a solution? Could we ring fence?
No, but Tinashe, we've had this discussion on the show, right? And perhaps our guests can chime in here. And we've had this view. I think one of you guys believes change put the currency in the constitution. I can't remember which of you did. Was it you?
Probably.
Are you there already?
Well, mine is a currency board. And it would,
But the problem is, even our constitution is not sacrosanct,
can be changed.
and we've changed it. The only way we're going to communicate to the outside world that we're now playing by the rules is to actually play by the rules. We can write as many pieces of paper as we like. We've shown that we don't even respect pieces of paper we've written.
Maybe Victor,
I would like to jump in there. You know, it's clear that it's not really the currency in which you are paid that drives a power sector, sort of expansion. Look at Mozambique. There are a number of power stations that have come in hundreds of megawatts.
Yeah.
The developers are paid in Metcash. Go to Malawi, there's big PV solar power plants that are being developed, successfully financed in Malawi, paid in Kwacha. Zambia is the same thing. South Africa pays in rand. Namibia pays in Namibian dollars, for example. Kenya pays in Kenya shillings. So it's not really the currency, it's about stability. Long-term stability, right?
Yes. It's about stability.
Market-based mechanisms for converting that money into US dollars.
Yeah.
And that's where it fractures in this country. So you can, let me give an example. Taku was giving the same example. On the commercial and industrial sector, we've got a customer right now, big project, almost 30 megawatts. Again, they have said, we'll pay you in US dollars. The idea is that would make, foreign financiers happy. You know what they've said? We would still want them to export something outside the country. The receivables from the exports are now paid directly in sector in the US dollar arrangements, even if they're generating domestic US dollar sales.
If you were in their shoes, would you trust the domestic banking?
No. I'm a developer. I'm not going to go against the lenders who are the only lenders that are likely to support that project. So I hear what in fact, these are also some of those lenders, perhaps maybe with TREB money, in the country as well. So they've gone through these issues.
Yes.
So these are the issues that we need to focus on. If we don't do that, the solution is simple. It's going to be domestic financing.
But
domestic financing is very limited.
Domestic financing is limited because of the stability issues.
Absolutely, because if foreign financiers are not happy, guess what will happen? Domestic financiers were also discovered. They're also not happy.
Yes, domestic financiers are not.
In fact, let me tell you something. I was fortunate that as CEO at the helm of ZESA, I was in a dollarized environment. And we managed to do this Kariba and Wange, thanks to the dollarized environment. He was our advisor. He knows about that. You see, that's exactly what gave the investors, these funders, confidence that things would happen. If it wasn't for dollarization, they would not have done it. So I accept what Victor is saying, that it's not so much the currency that you are using, that's the issue, but it's the stability that is the issue. Yes. Now, our stability now, you come now to the old debate that we've always had, how then do you make our currency stable? That's when he comes now with his currency board and that makes sense. But just now to say, I've got a US dollar, like Victor is saying, I've got a tariff in US dollar, but payable in local currency. You can only get local investors, as you rightly say. But again, the question is,
even that is limited.
How deep are our capital markets
Correct.
to support these projects?
Correct.
But the kind of investment that's required is massive. You see?
Remember, we only have got 400 megawatts just to focus it against the demand, which is now almost sitting at 3,000. This is billions of dollars of investments that's required to get us out of that hole.
Thank you, Victor, for bringing it back. I happen to be sitting around some of my favorite people to debate with, and sometimes we just go on and on. But thank you for bringing it back. So we've got this problem today. The numbers simply, and you three gentlemen are better versed with these numbers, but the way I understand it, if tomorrow Wange 7 and 8 are up and the Indian money comes through and we repair 1 to 6, Wange will go to 1.4. Kariba, if miraculously Kariba is full again, that'll give us another 1.2. We're now on 2.6. And you're talking about maybe 3,000 that we need today. Never mind that all these developments will take time. So what is to be done today? And maybe we'll just let each of you come in turn. I see Victor, you're jumping up and down. Maybe you go first.
We have drained down Kariba, okay? In normal circumstances, if we had proper generation at Wange, etc., and we're able to import, Josh will tell you we need 4 seasons, good rain seasons, to fill that dam back.
Wow.
Okay? Zesa confirmed a few days ago that because we would obviously be filling it in, assuming everything is going well, and we are also utilizing it because of the challenges somewhere else, we are looking at almost 6 to 7 years at the minimum of depressed generation out of Kariba. That is the situation that we are facing. Okay?
My daughter will be an adult.
Sure. These things take time, unfortunately. At Wange, yes, we will have 6 and 7, number 6, 7 and 8. Number 7 will be coming in by the end of this year, and then the other unit.
They say they switched it on this week.
Well, I mean, hot testing, right? And then of course, commissioning takes a bit of time, some few months. But let's just say we've got Wange 600 megawatts sometime by mid next year. You are talking about the refurbishments. Anybody who has been involved with refurbishments knows that it's not just a question of opening like you're just opening a car. You open it today, and then these are old power plants built in early 80s. It's not going to be an 18-month job if you're going to do it well. Of course, you're taking one unit after the other. But the point is that if you're going to actually do a good job, you're going to lose the existing units of Wange for quite a bit of time. So the new power plant, all it's doing is that it's just taking us to 600 megawatts steady. Kariba, we will continue to be depressed for a while. Okay? So there is no way that we will probably be now managing maybe just over 1,000 megawatts again where we were in the last couple of months when things were okay, which is okay anyway compared to where we are. So the solution is not that's part of the solution. The solution is we've got to add new capacity. And where is that going to come from? Like we said, maybe imports, but again, imports are constrained by the fact that they're no longer available. They've been snapped. Okay? We have to put in new capacity in this country. There is that insatiable appetite in this country, in that affinity for imports. A group of large mines, they went to Zambia trying to buy 200 megawatts. We gave this example. They were given a tariff, 10.96. They were negotiating a 10-year contract. They would have paid within that 10 years $2.2 billion. And by the way, we've already spent more than $1 billion in the last 10 years importing power. Okay? So importing 200 megawatts only.
No, not in 10 years. In 2 years, I believe. I think Trasha's got his laptop, but I think we do about 500 million a year.
It's a lot of money.
Power imports.
It's a lot of money. That example.
Well, I think last quarter we did 78. We imported 78 million worth.
In a quarter, so times 4, 300.
Yeah.
And that number is because we didn't have the cash to import as much as we wanted.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So over 2 or 3 years.
But I'm just using this example where these people were negotiating 200 megawatts from Zambia. It was a 10-year contract. That is $2.2 billion. Power which was going to come from the Kafue lower, which Zambia has just completed, a 750 megawatt. Zambia built that plant at a cost of $1.6 billion. And you are buying 200 megawatts on a 10-year contract and you pay $2.2 billion, which is the $1.6 billion plus a lot of change. That is the value of being organized. What do you think will happen after 10 years? Isn't it the ability to build has receded even further? Because you are importing, you will continue keeping on importing. you are tying. Remember, somebody was saying, but you've got all these people that are spending $7 a day in generators. You are tying that capacity to actually do something domestically into imports. So you will never free yourself out of imports. That's how addictive they are.
So what's the solution?
We have to add capacity, domestic capacity.
How?
Okay, there's they say there's what in the pipeline 1,000 megawatts that has been approved by ZERA.
But some of those projects will never see the light of day.
No. I mean, we can breathe life into them somehow. We can actually make this market vibrant again by dollarizing the market. That's where my argument is. And then those projects, once it's like that, then those projects can start to happen.
I know Victor's raring to jump in.
Let's split them. It's 2,000 megawatts renewables, and then the rest with thermal power plants, right? Like coal-fired power plants. And Josh, you know that nobody's going to finance thermal today.
Now no one is going to finance thermal. Yeah. But remember, there was Batoka that was supposed to happen as well.
Again,
Yes.
ZERA confirmed it's like 10 years away.
And how will Batoka feel when Kariba is not full?
Well, you mean, there's a risk, obviously, of developing all your power stations along the same river.
And Batoka is downstream, right?
It's downstream. It's upstream of
upstream.
Kariba.
Yes.
So while Batoka is filling,
Yeah.
Correct.
Kariba can't fill.
It's a run of the river, actually.
that's correct, yeah.
You're not really damming much.
Yeah.
It's a run of the river scheme.
I'm not an engineer, so I have to check with you guys if I'm right.
Yeah.
Taku, your solution.
No, so we do have to add capacity, without a doubt. But I think invariably, I mean, looking at my crystal ball, we're all going to come back and and say that, we need to get our, besides currency, our regulations in order and stable. And that's literally the bottleneck. Of the 2,000 or so megawatts that Sarah has approved, I've got 56 of those megawatts. And that's the one that I was saying that, under normal circumstances, at the beginning of this year, we had pretty much secured all the debt and equity that we needed. But we couldn't come to an agreement on some of these very basic things, right? And so essentially, the reason I was saying that, no, it's been about 12 months that we're celebrating because we had to go back and start again. The issue was not about the project. Well, maybe sometimes we're not the most clever guys in the room or whatever, but it was more than just about us, right? So the question is, how are we going to raise the capacity? I think that is the bigger question. Like, where's the capacity going to come from, and how are we going to achieve it?
Yeah, can I bring back dose of reality?
Sorry, before you come in, Tinashe, we're about to open up for the audience to participate. So if you've got questions on, at the moment, I think you're only monitoring Twitter, right?
Yeah, I've got a number of.
So please raise your hands, and soon we're going to start letting people speak. Or you can also type in the chat, and Tinashe can give voice to your comments and questions.
Yeah. So I just we need a dose of reality, and the dose of reality is the same people we're asking for investment from are also looking at Zambia. They're looking at South Africa. They're looking at Mozambique.
Exactly.
Why would they come to Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Especially if they already have money trapped here, if they have a cousin who lost a farm here, and all these other things.
So we need to, and my solution is a currency board, because at least when you bring in a currency board, you are giving yourself a premium that the other countries don't have, which is currency stability. Because when you look at South Africa, the biggest problem, the only competitive advantage we have over South Africa is they've got the rand, and the rand will depreciate, right? If you look at Zambia, similarly, look at Mozambique, we know that they will have currency instability. So the only competitive thing that we have in Zim is if we can bring in currency stability over a long period of time, then an investor will start looking at Zimbabwe seriously and think, well, okay, I could take in the risk, the political risk or whatever risk, because I know that the currency in use is stable over a longer period of time, and government has guaranteed, everybody knows that we'll have the same currency for the next 10 years and it's stable. So it's either you do it with dollarization, full dollarization, and you say we are going to be dollarized for the next 10 years, 20 years, at least 10 years, or my solution with currency board, because there's something that's actually coming out from the guys who are doing energy, that actually they don't need US dollars. So if you dollarize, you're creating an artificial demand for dollars from people who actually don't need dollars. But if you're on a currency board, you give them the stability that they want. And only those who actually need US dollars will trade in US dollars. These guys, what they want is long-term stability and not US dollars.
Okay.
I have a question for the experts.
Sorry. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, because I've been, curious about this issue and looked at other parts of the world. How have they dealt with some of these challenges? And certainly, the currency issues that are a problem for Zimbabwe are not in Mozambique, in South Africa, and Zambia, in our neighbors, and most of the rest of SADC. But South Africa's got load shedding, and I picked up that the region in general is actually got a power deficit. And yet, if you look at a country like China, just last year alone, they installed 50 gigawatts of solar. This year, they're on track to double that to 100 gigawatts. Cumulatively, they'll end 2022 with 400 gigawatts just of solar alone. And I did a bit of math, and that's enough to power all of Africa. So what is holding us back, even in these places where they don't have Zimbabwe's currency issues? If a country like China in a year can install 100 gigawatt of solar, what's holding back the region? Why do we have this challenge?
And before you guys come in, and Tinashe, can you start preparing for audience members? I'll just add to that question. I mean, you guys have really depressed us and told us that there's no short-term solution. But look, people cannot wake up at 4 a.m. to iron forever. There must be something that can be done quickly. And so, between my comment and Rufaro's, we'll just give everybody 45 seconds to quickly jump in, and then we'll let the audience come in.
I'm starting.
You were complaining before.
Okay, so I think so from this is a bit of a contentious one, but I think the first thing is, I think as many of us as possible should be jumping onto independent supply, be it solar or otherwise. Either way, even if everything was stable, one would find that if people are paying market price for energy from the utility, it would be cheaper to have to generate your own power using solar in the long run. So I think it's one that as many people as possible should be doing that. Two, I think whether or not I think we should be becoming more intelligent on a daily basis about the appliances that we use and how we use them and when we use them. These are all very basic and rudimentary things. And then I'm going to say something that is a bit
45 seconds.
Contentious, which is that in the meantime we need to immediately ramp up our peaking power supply, and the fastest way to do that is to use fossil supply using temporary generators.
Okay, sorry.
The UK,
I was going to say just so we can
UK
move on.
is licensing new core, isn't it?
You're basically saying the solution is sort yourself out at household level, and Zesa think about going back to the DEMA model, bring back a Greco or someone like that. Yeah. Victor?
There's no quick solution to power problems. Okay? But at
You
a
need
household,
to drink something.
at a house, it needs sober minds here. At a household level, the president alluded to it. Move to solar, if you can afford it, of course. We know there are upfront costs. But if we're going to solve the country's problems, like we're saying, look at where our generation is, look at where the demand is. Yes, we've got to ramp up, renewables, led by solar, of course. To just conceive a solar project now, even 10, 15, 20 megawatts, and take it to commercial operations. If you're doing well and it's smooth, it's at least 4 years. Okay? That is the short term when it comes to power generation. When you're talking about the large thermal power projects, Josh knows that they employed us in 2011 to be their transaction advisors for Wange. In 2011, we are only seeing commercial operations in 2023. 12 years later, that is normal. Anywhere in the world, whether you are in Germany, whether in South Africa, by the time you celebrate a power plant, there's almost at least a decade, in development and raising financing, etc., and construction. So it takes time. So there is nothing like really it's easy. At a household level, of course, get yourself a solar system, fix some lights, get some plugs, watch TV. That's okay. Yeah.
He's actually a guy who was doing something in this economy.
Yeah, okay, let me say, I don't know, they saw today's paper, and just announcing that they've got about 400 megawatts that they'll be getting in the next 2 weeks. So it looks like there is some quick fix to this, and it's these power imports. I must say in 2015, we had a similar predicament. We had to bring down generation at Kariba to about 280 megawatts. That was the time we employed DEMA. You see what I mean? So what they need to do now, which is what they are doing, is going to the market and sniffing out any power that they can get, provided they've got the money. And for that, I'm seeing they are doing that on the back of what the regulator is doing for them, but the tariffs are being bumped up. But they still have to, in my view, ZESA is now charging some customers, I think on the back of that SI that Tinashe was talking about, in foreign currency. And that's helping the situation. So that's exactly what needs to be done immediately. And they are already on it, which is fantastic. The one that Taku has raised is a very important point also. This is the time also to see whether we can employ diesel. In 2015, what we did was we asked government to waiver duty on diesel. And we managed to get that electricity from DEMA at 15.4 US cents per kilowatt hour, which was less than what we were being offered by a sister utility, EDM. It was competitive. So it can be structured in such a way that it's competitive. So those are the things that they have to do. Now, if ZESA is going to do that, and they have their tariff, the next problem that ZESA is collecting revenue. They have to address that. And as much as possible, when I was there, I think 32% of our income was on prepaid, was already prepaid. They need to move like we had in Lesotho, where almost about 100% of our income was prepaid.
Even the president in Lesotho pays prepaid.
The government pays prepaid as well. The government institutions. You see what I mean? So that's, to me, that's it. Of course he does. He's on prepaid as well. Definitely. He's on prepaid.
And our farmers can be on prepaid?
We would have to put them on prepaid. That's the only way to go. You see?
Okay. Okay.
So
Taku, we're going to
I've
give you. I know you want to rebut. We're going to give you a couple of minutes. But while you're doing that, Tinashe, can we take the questions in threes?
No, I've got questions already.
Yes.
And then, so our panel can actually answer those.
Yes. So I'm saying, can we just take them in threes for time management purposes? And if you get given the chance to speak, please be very concise. And unfortunately, we're under a little bit of time pressure now.
Sure.
And we're going to try and accommodate as many people as possible, and panelists as well, as we're responding to the questions. Let's try and be concise, and if something's been said, it's been said. Let's move on to the next thing. So, Taku, very, very quickly.
Well, it's not a rebuttal, it's just an add-on. I think Koma Josh just talked about DEMA. And Tinashe asked about what happened with DEMA. I think it was a very political thing where everybody complained about, why are people using so much expensive electricity? At the time, it was an emergency. And at the time, it was meant to cover a gap that exists in the market. And it's I think 15.4 cents a kilowatt hour for diesel power is actually insanely good. I'm curious to find out how they did it. I think even in the best of the best, when we used to supply to diesel power plants, the most we could do was 25, 26, and we were a very, 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 very efficient.
Fuel prices then were cheaper.
Well, it's 25, 26, yes. But the point I'm making is that what happened before was very good. Now, the fact that we also, I think it's time for the guys at ZESA to actually be tough and actually realize that the noise has to be put aside, and actually we need to do something about this in terms of emergency power. I'm not necessarily a fan of diesel, but I think it is what it is.
Okay, so
Tinashe?
All right, so we've got three questions or contributions that I thought were very interesting. The first one is from Imi Bono, and he says, why can we not talk to our miners and they can finance a new coal power plant and we can give them tax relief or reduced power tariffs for at least 10 years? That will bring some sort of certainty for them. And the second one is
from... Josh, if you can think about that one. And I'm thinking Sengwa.
And then the second one is from Constantine, Champion John, and he says, in the case of financing, who can we trust to raise finance, knowing our history of defaulting to major creditors? Domestic finance is very little as it is right now.
Victor?
Okay, then the third one has to do with the risk that are not just in energy sector, but currency risk, political risk, and free flow of funds risk, that this is impossible in Zimbabwe. So how can we mitigate this?
Taku, you didn't credit the viewer who asked that
That's from Kosnati.
as well.
Yeah, and then there's one from Signoro. Okay, so he asks follow-up questions, and he says, what happened to the EMA project? I think we've answered that. How much was actually spent? We've answered that. So that one I think we've.
So
and then someone also.
we're going to forget.
Okay.
Yeah. Insofar as coal is concerned, after the COP meetings, the position on coal, it's very unlikely that there will be any coal development. In fact, I notice now in Germany, they've actually only revived coal plants that they shut down, but they've actually revived them. But coal may not actually happen. We're seeing the things. Even China is actually explicitly saying that they will not support any coal development.
Long-term financing, these projects are long-term. So we're looking for, debt, 15 to 20 years debt financing to make them viable. And mostly, of course, US dollar debt. So there's got to be mechanisms for long-term stability to convince, creditors that they will be able to get their money. If we get it in Zim dollars here, that there are market-based mechanisms for converting that money. And that's what we've been discussing here. That is really the heart of fundraising for future projects in the country.
Okay. Sorry, I did be concise, but you've introduced a very interesting word, which I think Tinashe will get excited about. You use the word mechanisms. So you're saying it's not just about words, it's not just about laws, but we must make things work in a particular way that gives people comfort.
When we raised $2 billion for Wangen Kariba extension, it was easy because a lot of it was coming from China Exim Bank, etc. And there's also a political mandate to raise some of that money. $1 billion from China Exim Bank. Believe me, it's not looking at sort of the fundamentals, okay? But Josh knows there was $100 million almost, which was needed from commercial banks to make the whole $2 billion scheme work. Just $100 million, without which nothing works. And we needed to borrow it from banks, etc., Standard Bank. What the banks insisted on was that we must sell some of our electricity to Namibia.
Yeah.
The proceeds of the sale from Namibia, the utility Nampower, would then be paid directly to the creditors. Again, just circumventing, sort of the local,
Currency issues.
So we have got much to do about creating that long-term stability, not to convince you and I, but to convince those creditors.
So I think the question was about risk, which actually kind of ties to what they say: political risk. How do you handle that? Credit risk, etc., currency risk. And I think Kumar Victor started to talk about it a little bit earlier when he was talking about how they have to put invoices offshore. He just talked about it again with the CESA transaction with Nampower. And it remains the same, right? We also have to do the same thing. We're also forced to get invoices paid offshore before the exports come back to Zimbabwe and that sort of thing. But and this is how we kind of manage the risk. And then the next point is you can still buy insurance for Zimbabwean projects, especially if they're US dollar export related on the international market. It's expensive, but it also de-risks the project. But all of these issues just add up the price and cost of electricity. So against what it is that we're trying to fight against in the first place, which is ironically to protect consumers. So yeah, I still think you have to come back to creating regulation that and mechanisms, especially like you say, because literally for every transaction, we are all suddenly investment bankers or strategic finance professionals who have to do this, right? And like create all these fancy mechanisms to make things work to raise money for Zimbabwe.
Okay, from Bernard Mukwaira, he says, what about nuclear? For instance, small modular reactors. Maybe the engineers can chip in there.
Are there other questions? Is that the last one?
I think that's the last one, and that's a good one before we get speakers.
Again, it's not a technical problem. It doesn't matter whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal or coal right now, of course, because of environmental concerns. But also nuclear suffers from that. But even if it didn't, it doesn't matter whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind or solar or hydro. You have got to raise long-term financing at a cost, sort of competitive rates. Okay, and it is these mechanisms for raising financing that need to be addressed. So the technology behind what supplies the megawatts
It's
and whatever,
secondary.
it doesn't matter.
Secondary.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
so
thank you.
from Scott Macmillan, he says thermal power is essential as a base to supply reliable and affordable power for the industrial and mining sectors. Coal is impossible to finance, and so gas to power needs to be a major part of the solution. Zimbabwe can be a domestic and regional power player with the right policies. I think speaking again to the policies, then we've got Nick Tandy, who says $7. Okay, so this is a mathematician, fact checking us. Says $7 on a generator, $7 a day on a generator works out to about $380 million for 3 years for just 50 homes. How crazy is the idea of financially ring-fenced small projects for these customers?
Okay, so
So customers who are willing to pay in US dollars are willing to pay $7 a day, and
so why don't we get them
supply.
to give us $7 and we give them a small power plant?
Yeah.
So, Josh, if you could deal with the gas to power issue, because I know you guys looked at Lupane and other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
and then maybe you guys can both each have us a bite of the cherry on the second question.
Yeah. That would be fine if it happens. And it's also an option. I don't know the cost of it. I know in Mozambique they've got gas now, but they've not really developed it for power generation yet.
Oh, Josh, you've forgotten they've just commissioned big thermals right now in gas-fired power plants.
Oh, I was, yeah.
Yeah.
At
Right now
what
they-
price? At what price is it?
I don't know exactly the tariff, but Globelec just commissioned the power plant, and there's another one at the border. Right now, Mozambique is sitting on almost 500 megawatts.
Which is something that we could do then here
Yes.
in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If only the same problem remains. So gas is considered a transitionary energy source, simply because it's forgiven as a source of power, because I guess the powers that be are saying no to thermal, except for the thermal they use. But it's a slightly different discussion. But I think we still do need to. I'm a firm proponent of using coal and thermal for baseload, especially for growing our industries. Even though I'm a renewable energy guy, but we've personally.
So you are capable of being politically incorrect.
I didn't realize I was. I'm just honest. So it's yeah, but so I think gas would be great, but I think the problem still comes back to the same thing. Where do you raise the money to do it? We've been exploring gas on our side as well. We're facing the same issue, partly because of COP issues. A lot of the gas that we have in Zimbabwe is coal-bed methane, and the fact that it's got, even though it's a transitionary energy source, the fact that it's got that word coal inside it is immediately just blacklists it to the same as coal. And then even besides that, like just raising long-term financing for Zim remains the issue there. But I think gas is actually a very, very good option for us.
Sorry, just to dwell on coal a little bit.
Can you answer the audience question first?
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's a very interesting approach that is coming from the audience about pooling revenues from a number of domestic users or whatever it is. You know, the funny thing, that's actually the utility model. That's actually what we call ZESA, for example. Yeah? It's actually about pooling. So what he's simply saying is we don't trust our utilities, we don't trust the mechanisms that we have for pooling, sort of resources together. But that's exactly why this business is done by utilities, whether it's water, whether it's telecoms, whether it's electricity. We pool our resources through utilities. The issue, if we're going to solve problems here, is not really tinkering with these sort of, one-time solutions here and there. They are good, they make sense. I can see, it may solve, we may build a 20 megawatt power plant here, we may build something over there. But if we're going to really solve the deep problems that we're facing in the power sector in the country, it's about attracting billions of dollars in long-term financing. And we must focus you back on the mechanisms for attracting foreign financiers to augment domestic financiers. The Minister of Finance actually said it. Oh, it's about convertibility. You saw him saying that. Things that we know, that people are looking for mechanisms for convertibility and stability in the long term. And once we solve that, we will not need to pull somebody's $7. We are already doing that. What is your electricity bill doing? It's pulling your money so that we give it to ZESA, and ZESA will invest, or we give to a private sector developer in IPP so that they also invest. So we do have those mechanisms already.
You actually look like I'm truly saying that.
I have a quick segue on coal, because in South Africa, Sasol has a plant that converts coal to diesel.
Yeah.
And 30% of the diesel consumed in that market is from Sasol.
Yes.
And you were talking about DEMA potentially being a stopgap measure or partial solution to our issues. We've got a lot of coal, and because of the narrative of climate change and clean energy, it's extremely difficult to raise capital to fund thermal coal power plants. So why, in your opinion, have we not explored the Sasol model, which is basically converting that coal to diesel?
Okay, can we put that on hold just so we let the audience have a bite of the cherry?
Sure.
So we've got Welly. Welly, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
And will you
Contribution.
please try and be as concise as possible?
Yeah, a quick question. Is there any thinking on bringing platinum refining onto the into Zimbabwe by building a dedicated tower to platinum refining and leveraging that finance instead of us shipping it all to South Africa? That probably benefits from it, and financing it through maybe those mechanisms, because we're already making a lot of money exporting platinum or refined ore to South Africa. And is there thinking outside Tinashe, your book Economics of the Currency Board? Because it ties in, to me, I look at it, it ties in with reforming oneself out of power. So that equation there, you need to comment on this eventually. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Can we got another one?
Yeah. Can we take a couple more?
Yeah. Nick, you can go ahead.
Thank you, gents. I'm following up on, right, and I would like to start about political economy. My sense, working in water where you have to some familiar issues, is can influence, of course, don't have control on the political economy dynamics in any country. And so the question becomes, is there space for reform? And when there is space for deep reform, then the long-term solutions, of course, those great ones should work. But sometimes there's only space for incremental reform. And so in the situations where you have space only for small incremental reform, what are the things that we can do? Thanks.
Okay. I don't know if anybody here feels brave enough to speak on behalf of the platinum industry.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the platinum
before you do,
industry. Yeah.
Then on the second one to do with reform, I think Josh,
I didn't quite get what the question was.
would you like to repeat
On
what
the
the question
reform
was?
Okay, so on the reform, I think their argument is where no one is brave enough, or on political economy, no one is brave enough to do the deep-seated reforms that we need, but perhaps we could do incremental reforms. You know, that's probably what we need to do.
And what are some of the small ones we can do?
I can speak to a platinum refinery.
Okay. So maybe Josh talk about the issues around reform, and I don't know if anybody else would like a bite of that cherry. And maybe so Victor and Rufaro, you want to come in on the platinum?
Yes. Rufaro, shall I?
Yeah, sure, carry on.
I don't want to be specific on the platinum, but we are seeing the cement producers now, switching to solar, okay? Developing, solar either directly or through commercial and industrial developers. We are seeing guys like Takude developing PV solar power plants to supply, mining groups, etc., etc. We are seeing the ferrochrome producers also developing solar either directly or a developer coming in to sell them electricity. The iron and steel plant that we spoke about, they are also looking for electricity from a wind development, etc. So the point is that at the end of the day, whether you're in platinum, whether wherever you are, you need electricity. And the receivables from the sales, That's what you use to bank, the development of a new plant. But there's a further point maybe that Rufaro will talk about. But he's saying it's a very profitable venture anyway. That's good for the country. Why won't we just do a bit more about that? Maybe that's what we can talk about.
Yeah, so if we were to assume that we don't have any power issues, the reason why we don't have a refinery for platinum is because it's a multi-billion-dollar project with a multi-decade payback period, and there just isn't that conviction and confidence in Zimbabwe as an investment destination for people to look seriously at putting up such a refinery. It just doesn't make sense. So all the major platinum producers in Zimbabwe today, notwithstanding that they have different shareholders, ship the concentrate to the same refinery in South Africa. And they have no interest in making the capital commitment to build one here, because we just don't have the policy framework to make it make sense for them to do that.
But how come they mine, though?
Look, I think the investments in the mines were made, decades ago.
Right. Okay.
If they had to do it today,
No. Fair point.
Tell me what you want to have a
So sunk cost already.
I know that my a couple of friends and my customer in the mining sector is starting to work more and more at they're looking more and more at feasibility studies for some of these issues to see if they really make sense, right? So I think a lot of the studies that you hear are, it's almost impossible to do refining in Zimbabwe, but it almost always certainly aligns with an incentive for the person to export the mineral. I'm excited now that we're seeing more and more people saying that, let's be brave about it and take independent studies and see what can come out of it. Because I don't know if the whole truth belongs to us as a nation. It belongs to people who are coming in and putting money in. I've seen some feasibility studies that completely write off the options of investing in of going upstream in terms of projects in these metals, and the truth on paper is not always what it looks like in the research. But this is not to say that this is 100% all the case. I can't speak for platinum, for example. Regarding regulation and going piecemeal and improving it, it is a good idea. I think that, but it's not the whole story, right? I think some of these changes and some of these issues that we see, for better or worse, I think we need more stepwise changes than incremental ones, if you ask me. They need bravery, as someone mentioned earlier, to sit down and say, look, guys, this is not working. Let's really rethink this.
But the viewer is saying, and I hope you guys can pick me up, the viewer is saying, look, we know that the politicians are not brave enough. So what can we do?
So I'll bring it back to you. I'm a bit hopeful. In the last couple of years, I know that there's some sit-downs that have happened on behalf of the energy sector, for example, that, believe it or not, had never happened. Without going into detail, one involves the RBs, the Minister of Finance and Minister of Energy, sitting down together to figure out how to handle guarantees and such for IPPs. Apparently, they'd never sat down until really just sat down to say let's look at this together, right? And with CSI in the same room, we're starting to see some of these changes, and I think those just require willpower, not from all politicians, but just from a few guys to drive it home. But we still need stepwise changes. Incremental changes result in small celebrations. That's still bigger progress, I think.
Yeah. There were in the sector two key reforms that were required to be made, and these were made. And the one was institutional, the other one was legal and regulatory. So the one yielded the institution ZERA, and the other one also opened up the market for PSP, private sector participation. So they've been put in place. I think where we are probably falling short is, okay, fine, we might be having a regulator, but how independent is the regulator in terms of determining the tariff? That becomes a real issue, you see. And I remember there was suggestions, probably the regulator needed to be appointed like the ombudsman, you know what I mean? And not to be appointed by the minister of the line ministry, to make them more independent, you see what I mean? So those were the issues. But the other issue that we're talking about for the sector was this issue which is to do with currency. I don't know those reforms that need to be done. Then we're now talking of how then do we have a stable currency in the country. We're now back to the currency boards and all these other things that we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah,
do you believe in regulated prices
In regulated prices?
Yeah, or should we not just open it up to the market?
Okay, no. You see, you must know the power sector, has got some natural monopoly in it.
Correct.
Like the transmission network and distribution network. There's no competition. Is that right? So there's need for regulation there. But when it comes to, say, generators, there's to be competition. Because these are generators, they can compete. In fact, in other markets, even here in SAP, you actually make your offers for your power, and the off-takers come in with their bids, and they match the offers and bids, and then it trades.
Rufaro, let's also, you know, the laws here, the regulations allow you to build your own power plant and sell to any customer, domestic customer, even outside the country. You determine your own prices there. Okay, they're not regulated at all. It's only when you've got to sell to ZESA that's when they're regulated.
Okay.
Okay, so there are mechanisms for you to develop your own power plant, sell to whoever you want, or to a distribution zone, whatever it is. But if you're selling to a customer, to an industrial customer, to a mine, no, there's no regulation there in terms of the price in which you charge each other.
Okay, can we get Christine? Christine, you can unmute yourself and you can speak.
Thank you, Tinashe, and thanks for the wonderful submissions from the panelists. I just wanted to comment building on the question raised by Nick, and I think the submissions just made by Engineer Chamba around the political economy in which reforms are happening. Just to say that looking at the indices that reflect the performance of the electricity supply industry from a regulatory perspective, Zimbabwe is scoring quite well. If you look at the AFDB Electricity Regulatory Index, I think from 2019 we were ranked 6 out of the 36 countries, and we moved up very fast, and we are now ranked to be deemed to have a substantial regulatory environment, because there have been achievements in institutional capacity and renewable energy frameworks and tariff processes that could support growth of renewables and attract private investment in the sector. But it's very clear that in the context of a challenging macroeconomic environment, capital is fought for choice, and maybe capital is a bit shy, and we're not seeing as much traction. I think Victor just said that the rules do allow independent power producers to even play in the Southern African power pool, bypassing the utility as well, but we're not seeing that much happening. So my question is, given that those conditions are not likely to change in the near future, what does this mean for the business model of the utility if more projects now continue to bypass this off-taker, which clearly is not very bankable? What does this mean for the viability of the utility moving forward? Are we going to see what happened to PTC happening to ZESA, or are they invincible? Thank you.
I think only one person can answer that question.
That's a very interesting question. In fact, there's no doubt about it. What's happening in the sector, especially with the renewables, is very disruptive to the utility model. There's no question about it. And the utilities are actually feeling it. So the best is not to fight renewables. I think they have to be part of the game insofar as renewables are concerned. But that's a very valid point. I mean, Victor has just given an example. He's actually working on some projects for some customers. These customers were previously taking electricity from ZESA. And they're on solar now. So they become fair weather friends to ZESA. When the sun is there, they were taking from solar. When the sun is not there, they fall back on ZESA. You know what I mean?
It's in the industry, it's called the utility, the death spiral, isn't it? You know, as the utility continues to increase the tariffs, the to survive, right? To meet its obligations, its growing obligations. The renewable developers, their prices are going down and down. And then, all the key customers, begin to switch, and the utility remains with all these obligations, historical obligations, and is unable to raise even, more financing, so that is the problem as well, without considered effort. But there is no doubt that we do need the utility model, transmission, etc., even in generation as well. And we also need the IPP, so the two must work together in some way. Yeah.
And if I come in as a corporate financier and an investment banker, I don't think the possible outcomes are binary. I think there's actually a possible outcome where the utility cooperates with the IPPs.
Yeah.
When the utility is working well, it sits on large amounts of cash.
Yes.
It sits on large amounts of land. A big cost I understand of IPPs is connecting to the grid. And yet the utility owns all the land around the grid. And ESCOM's already doing it, where it's making its land available to new entrants, which then substantially reduces the cost of the IPP, and that reduction in cost can translate into equity in the project. A well-functioning utility is very cash flush. That cash can be used to buy equity in new projects. And in the end, imagine a situation where ZESA owns, I wouldn't want them to own 51%, but imagine they own 25% of all the IPPs in the future. They still remain the largest power producer, and yet now there's much broader based participation in the industry.
But you see where this model destroys or affects utilities is on existing installations, which are big installations. Where now, all of a sudden, they were sending so many gigawatt hours out to these customers.
At a fixed tariff.
Exactly. And they've got these costs that they are still probably paying back for these assets. So chances are some of the assets will get stranded, no doubt about that. But going forward now, the utilities now will have to be more nimble, and the model of having big power stations now probably will disappear
That's
altogether.
change.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what you're talking about is called the fallacy of the sunk cost, right?
Yes.
That, okay, because I now have this
Yes.
big power station, I must double down on it. I think as men, we all know the story of when you're driving the family and you're never lost. You're just in unfamiliar surroundings. And you decide to keep going. Whereas the sooner you actually accept that this decision wasn't viable and make a U-turn, the sooner you actually get back on the correct path. So yes, you've got these legacy issues, but accept them, swallow the pill, and find a way to deal with them. But don't keep going down that road.
Yeah.
Now, what's the word? Embrace the new. Have we got any more people?
Do you hear what Dr. Christine said, though? That from the rankings of regulators, etc., we are doing well.
Yes.
And we kept on emphasizing that point, that our problem is not regulation. Our problem is not tariff setting. But the power sector sort of mechanisms on their own are not going to do it without also the other sides, which is, the financing sector as well.
Absolutely agreed. It's actually kind of interesting that there's a lot of really, really good stuff, and they're like little things that just don't tie in together, right? From here and there. I actually don't think that there's a death spiral coming for utilities. I think developing new mega projects is going to be difficult, but we need something called a base load, which, for example, renewables can never give. And that has to come from all of these legacy power plants, like the coal plants that exist, gas-fired power plants where they have them. Nuclear is very difficult, if not near impossible, for IPPs to develop. So utilities will always have a space. When you overgenerate, you need to put the power somewhere. It needs to be moved from point A to point B if your customer can't take it, even in the interim, so that someone else can take it. Utilities will always have a place to pay, a place to play. So I think the future would look good. And I think also to put on top of that, what you just mentioned, that they can also participate in all of these IPP plays and everything else. In Dubai, where I was for the longest time, DIWA and Aqua Power was private developer, but the utilities would actually be co-investors and co-developers in large scale solar projects, and they remain that as well, right? So there's a lot of place to play. I think it just needs to change a little bit, but they will always have a place.
Our tyrannical producer. Have we got another?
From YouTube. Okay. So this is just to acknowledge we've got a number of people who are contributing on YouTube, which has been great. We've got Farai Maresa, and he says, who is the main consumer of electricity? Is it domestic farming, mining, or even manufacturing?
Okay, again,
It's
there's only one person who can answer that question.
mining.
Yeah. So I think that it goes back to mining. They've got US dollars. They can pay. They're viable. But I think our biggest problem are farmers who I think it's highlighted here. They consume about 300 megawatts, but unfortunately, they're very powerful politically.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Okay. So then I think that's it. We've got a number of people that are live on YouTube, and they're following the discussions.
That's fantastic. And as I said, the tyrannical producer is waving at me that we must wind this up. But I know I didn't prepare you for this, but I think it would be nice if we closed off with an interesting story from your time at ZESA. Maybe something funny you remember, or something that surprised you.
Well, I tell you what, to be a chief executive of a power utility like this is a very onerous job in terms of responsibility. You have almost sleepless nights, no doubt about that. And it's very taxing politically as well. The times you're called to parliament to explain things, you have to be able to convey the message in the simplest of terms so that this will get across to them. But also, it's been nice. It was also nice interacting with different ministers, with different dispositions and so forth, which was also very interesting. But I must say that there was a lot of support that I got from government. I was quite happy during the time of the crisis in 2015. I think that's when they really tested our mettle, and we did well to acquit ourselves. We were almost faced with a crisis like this, but we managed to pull together all the players, government,
Are
OPC.
you accepting that it's a crisis?
It is a crisis.
Is there anyone who doesn't think it's a crisis?
Yeah, it is. And we managed to put together all these institutions to do this work together. I remember where the permanent secretary's office was like a war room, and we came there with our computers, with our spreadsheets to show how viable it would be to introduce diesel. People didn't want to know about diesel. It was an untouchable. But I was so happy that I managed to introduce diesel DEMA then, because the cost of unsupplied energy to the country would have been so huge. And we had a lot of customers we'd been talking to who wanted to invest and expand. And we'd assured them that we'd do it. And I was glad that we did. And it was Minister Chinamasa then. He was very supportive. I used to, almost every week, have to go to the governor's office. And he was very supportive. And the lesson from that is if you mobilize all these people together, the people who matter, in situations of crisis like this, you can always make it. I think that's what I want to say.
So from that optimistic perspective, do you...
You have no respect for the producer, do you?
No.
We actually don't have any time. We're out on Twitter already. So.
Oh,
Okay, but I can still finish my question for the YouTube audience.
no, we're not going to let you do it. You can finish your question off air.
Okay.
It's been lovely having you along. I think this has been, personally for me, one of the most enjoyable episodes we've shot. Really glad to have you guys around.
Thank you.
I now realize that it's the bow ties. Tinashe, there's nothing wrong with you as a guy, but it's these bow ties. They give you guys a very dark view of the world.
Wisdom.
But yeah, thank you very much for coming along. For once, you guys actually had people that know what they're talking about and that you perhaps ought to take seriously when it comes to the energy crisis. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe, especially in this silly season. Be good. And if you can't be good,
Be good
be
at
good
it.
at it.